They say every small town keeps a secret, but Fair Hollow, Virginia, buried one so deep that even time tried to forget it. In the fall of 1862, the townsfolk gathered every Sunday in a pale white wooden church at the edge of the valley, a church led by Reverend Thomas Blythe, a man praised for his sermons but feared for his eyes. His words spoke of purity and salvation, but his gaze carried something darker, something unspoken. Locals would whisper that the pastor's home was far too silent, his daughter Evelyn Blythe too pale, too obedient, and his wife's laughter had vanished years ago. When the church bell tolled at dawn, no one dared question what happened behind the parsonage door. That was until one cold December night, when a flickering oil lamp glowed in the chapel long past midnight, and a scream echoed through the valley. The next morning, the Reverend announced something that would forever stain Fair Hollow's history. He had taken his daughter Evelyn as his lawful wife. The congregation sat in frozen horror, torn between faith and disbelief, while the Reverend stood tall, his face calm, his voice trembling only as he quoted scripture to justify the unthinkable. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said he was cursed. Others whispered that he believed Evelyn was the reincarnation of his dead wife. No one dared to confront him. Those who tried vanished, or were found near the old riverbank with prayer pages stuffed in their mouths. The townsfolk called it divine punishment, but those who lived near the church knew better. They swore that at night they could hear Evelyn's weeping echo from the basement beneath the altar. Before we uncover the dark truth of what really happened inside that church, subscribe to the channel for more real, life forgotten horrors. Where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? This story will shake you. Let's begin. The morning of December 21st, 1862, dawned heavy with frost. Fair Hollow's townsfolk awoke to the sound of the church bell, ringing not for service, not for mourning, but for something none could name. Inside the church, Reverend Blythe stood at the altar, wearing his black robe, his trembling hands clutching an open Bible. Before him stood his daughter, Evelyn, dressed in her late mother's wedding gown. Its lace was yellowed, its fabric thin, but the veil hid the tears in her eyes. Witnesses claimed the air inside that chapel was so cold it hurt to breathe. No guests were invited, yet somehow the pews were full. Every face was pale, every whisper hushed. Some swore they didn't even remember walking there, that they were pulled by something unseen. The Reverend spoke the vows himself, his voice echoing through the hollow like thunder. "Till death do us part," he said, and Evelyn's lips barely moved when she repeated it. When he kissed her, the lamps flickered out, and a gust of icy wind burst through the doors, snuffing every candle. From that day forward, Fair Hollow began to rot. The crops blackened, the river filled with dead fish, and the sound of church bells began to echo at midnight, even when no one was there. Evelyn was no longer seen in town, though villagers swore they saw her pale figure in the church window, wearing her mother's dress, her face gaunt and eyes empty. The Reverend continued preaching about divine union, his sermons twisting into madness, quoting verses that no one could find in any scripture. A farmer who dared to ask him about the wedding disappeared 2 nights later. They found his hat near the church steps, soaked in blood and ash. Still, no one spoke against Reverend Blythe again. They said his sermons had turned to curses, that the man who once saved souls now bound them. And beneath the church floorboards, something began to stir, something that sounded like sobbing and scratching, as if someone buried alive was trying to claw their way back to light. After the scandalous wedding, Fair Hollow fell under a hush, the kind that felt almost supernatural. Weeks passed, and not a soul saw Evelyn Blythe step beyond the churchyard fence. The parsonage windows stayed shuttered, though candlelight sometimes flickered inside long after midnight, when neighbors brought food or gifts to the new bride. Reverend Blythe would open the door just enough to take them, his voice calm but hollow. He always said the same thing: "Evelyn is praying." But those who listened closely could hear faint sobs behind him, like someone crying into a pillow. By February of 1863, the town had begun to change in ways no one could explain. Livestock gave birth to stillborn offspring, mirrors inside homes cracked on their own, and birds stopped singing near the church entirely. Locals whispered that the Reverend had invoked something, a curse that bound him and his daughter in a union far darker than love. One cold evening, a boy named Samuel dared to peer through the parsonage window. What he saw was not the gentle daughter of a preacher, but a pale ghost of her former self, Evelyn, thin as bone, her hair tangled, sitting in a rocking chair that creaked slowly back and forth. Her lips were stitched shut with fine black thread. Samuel ran screaming home, his mind broken by the sight. No one believed him, until a week later, his mother found the same black thread, tied around their doorknob, twisted into the shape of a cross. The family moved out of town before nightfall. Meanwhile, Reverend Blythe's sermons grew stranger. He no longer preached salvation. He spoke of the divine womb and rebirth through sin. He would pause mid-sermon and look toward the back of the church, as if someone invisible stood there, listening. Those who sat near him swore they heard whispering under the floorboards, faint, female, and pleading for release. Whatever Evelyn had become, it wasn't human anymore. Spring of 1863 arrived late to Fair Hollow. The valley stayed cold and gray long after the snow melted. The church's bell had fallen silent, but the town's fear had not. Rumors began to spread again, carried in whispers between trembling hands. Some claimed they'd seen Evelyn near the river at dawn, barefoot and pale, her nightdress dragging in the mud. Others swore she was heavy with child. One night, an old midwife named Martha Lyle was summoned to the parsonage. Reverend Blythe appeared at her door in the rain, his face ghost white. "She's ready," he said. The woman followed him, clutching her lantern tight. Inside the parsonage, she found Evelyn lying on a bed surrounded by dozens of lit candles, their wax dripping like tears. Her skin was ice, cold, and her eyes fluttered open only once to whisper something Martha never forgot. "He said the child will be holy." The birth lasted through the night. The screams, they said, echoed through the valley, not like a woman's, but something unearthly, layered with voices that weren't her own. At dawn, the midwife stumbled out into the rain, her apron stained crimson. When questioned later, she refused to speak, only muttered one phrase until the day she died: "It wasn't a child." After that night, Reverend Blythe never preached again. He nailed the church doors shut from the inside, claiming God had chosen his home as the new sanctuary. The few who dared approach said they heard a baby crying within, but it didn't sound right. It gurgled like something breathing through water, its cry rising and falling in unnatural rhythm. Weeks later, the midwife's house burned to the ground with her inside. The sheriff found strange markings carved into her walls, circles with crosses in their centers, drawn in blood. No one in Fair Hollow spoke the Blythe name again. Yet, some swore that at night, when the wind was just right, they could still hear the sound of a baby crying from beneath the church. By the end of summer 1863, Fair Hollow was a ghost town. Half the homes were abandoned, their windows boarded, their fields grown over with weeds. The church stood silent, its once white paint now gray and blistered by rot. But at night, the townsfolk who stayed swore they saw a faint light glowing through the floorboards and heard the echo of something moving beneath. The sheriff, desperate for answers, gathered 2 men and forced open the church doors one fog, heavy evening. The stench hit them first, a mixture of decay, mold, and something sweetly rancid. The pews were overturned, the altar covered in strange carvings, circles, runes, symbols not from any known scripture. And near the pulpit, the Bible was open, but its pages had been torn out and replaced with scraps of flesh, inked in blood. When they pried open the trapdoor behind the altar, a rush of warm air hissed upward. The sheriff held his lantern over the steps, revealing walls smeared with soot, and something that pulsed faintly as if the wood itself were breathing. The sound came next, soft cooing, like an infant trying to hum a hymn. But when they descended, the light flickered, and something moved. Evelyn was there, or what was left of her. Her eyes were open, black and glassy, her skin stretched thin as parchment. She held something in her arms, a small, writhing shape covered in white cloth. The sheriff dropped his lantern, and in that flash of light before the fire spread, they saw it. The thing had no face. Its mouth was wide and human, but where eyes should have been were hollow pits that wept black fluid. Only one man made it out alive, and his mind didn't survive the night. He kept repeating the same phrase over and over before he died. It called me father. After that, the church was left to rot. The people of Fair Hollow never returned, and yet, travelers who pass the ruins today claim they still hear the faint sound of a baby humming beneath the ground, a lullaby no human should know. Autumn 1008. 163, Fair Hollow was dying, and those who remained knew the only salvation left was fire. The surviving townsfolk gathered outside the church one moonless night, armed with torches and trembling faith. They said the Reverend had become something else, a creature that preached to shadows, feeding the thing that called him father. No one knew if Evelyn was still alive, or if what they'd seen in that cellar was her ghost. But one truth burned through the fear: the church had to fall. The mob lit the first flame at the steps, their faces lit in orange and gold. The wood caught fast, as if it wanted to burn. The smoke rose thick and black, carrying the smell of rot and incense. Yet just as the fire reached the steeple, a voice rang out from within, a man's voice, calm, echoing through the flames. "You cannot burn what has been anointed." Then came the scream, a woman's wail so piercing that several dropped their torches and ran. The sound didn't come from the church, but from below it. The ground trembled. The earth split near the foundation, and smoke poured upward from a deep fissure glowing red from within. Through the flames, witnesses swore they saw Reverend Blythe standing in the doorway, holding something in his arms, a small white bundle that twisted as he raised it toward the burning cross atop the steeple. He whispered something no one could hear, then stepped into the fire willingly. The church collapsed soon after, its bell crashing down with a single, final toll that echoed through the valley like judgment itself. By morning, only ashes remained. But those who searched the ruins found something impossible: a set of small, blackened footprints leading away from the church and vanishing into the woods. No remains of Evelyn or the Reverend were ever found. And when the wind blew across the valley that day, it carried with it a faint sound, the crying of a newborn, mixed with laughter that wasn't human. Years passed. Fair Hollow vanished from maps, its valley reclaimed by the forest. Only ruins remained: half-buried gravestones, rotted wood, and a rusted church bell lying deep in the weeds. Travelers who wandered too close spoke of whispers on the wind, prayers muttered in an ancient tongue. Some claimed to see candlelight flicker between the trees. Others swore they heard a baby's laughter echoing through the mist, the same cursed laughter that ended Fair Hollow. In 1891, a surveyor sent by the state discovered something unusual beneath the old church site: a sealed stone crypt, unmarked and buried deep. When he pried it open, the air that escaped was warm and smelled faintly of flowers and blood. Inside lay a small coffin, far too new for its surroundings. He opened it, expecting bones, but there were none. Only a single handwritten page resting atop a bundle of cloth, still damp as if recently touched. The note read, "The union is eternal, the child walks." The surveyor left that same night and was never seen again. His horse returned alone at dawn, eyes wide and foaming. Locals sealed the crypt once more and built a small fence around it, marking it as sacred ground. But over the next decades, strange things continued: livestock disappearing, candles relighting themselves in empty homes, and children born with black irises that never reflected light. By the turn of the century, no one dared speak the name Blythe. And yet, descendants surfaced in nearby towns, quiet families with old Bibles missing the same pages, and portraits that all showed a familiar face. Pale skin, hollow eyes, and a faint scar where lips had once been sewn. Even today, Virginia locals warn travelers not to camp near the valley. They say the ground still breathes there, and sometimes at night, a lullaby drifts from beneath the soil. A soft, cooing voice that hums the hymn Reverend Blythe once preached. The song ends the same way every time, with a whisper, "Father is watching." The church may have burned, but the bloodline endures.